We'd like to thank our. All right. Well, welcome to the Museum of Glass. Our visiting artist here today is D.H. McNabb, working in the center of the studio with a white long sleeve. Now, at the end of his rod, he has solid white color. We are going to begin to work on the projects you see down here on our on our floor with our wonderful chalk drawings. The process you are seeing is a coloring application, which typically occurs early in the demonstration. Although that is white glass, right now it does have a reddish and orange glow. That is due to the heat that glass is at. It's entering about 2,300 degrees. We can see that glass and its viscosity easily enough to be snipped free from the rod itself. When we're doing the coloring application itself, it is very important that we spend our time ensuring that that white color will create an even layer dispersed around that bubble, that beginning bubble. This is going to be the beginning process of today's demonstration. You're more than allowed to take as many photos and videos as you like. If you're joining us, welcome to the Museum of Glass. Down here in the center, we are working with glass, and we are blowing air through the blowpipe to expand our bubble. We see that down here on this end. When someone is sitting on this end, they're standing by just to blow air through the blowpipe. Now, we do have a variety of projects going on, both in the center and on the far left side of the studio. But before we jump into anything, I do want to introduce our visiting artist here today is D.H. McNabb, working in the center of the studio. Throughout today's demonstration, we'll learn a little bit more about him and the artwork that he produces. But he has been working with glass for over 20 years now, and we are happy to have him as our visiting artist. Now, D.H. does teach around the United States and the world. He actually just came from Pilchuck Glass School, where he was teaching a class in session 3. Well, we are going to be working on the projects we see here on the ground, our chalk drawings. Now, we are going to be making them in a variety of sizes, but the largest cones will be the primary colors. We can see a red one down here, and then the secondary colors will be smaller. But we can see that the crew is already beginning to work on some of these down in the center. When we look at our chalk drawing, we'll notice that we are going to add a clear lens towards the very tip. This will give us the ability to look through these cones. To do so, we need to create an opening on the very tip where clear glass can be added. As that goes on down here in the center of the studio, real quickly, I do want to hit on what's going to be happening on your left-hand side of the studio. During this residency, our visiting artists will also explore a Horizon series, which we see here on this, with this chalk drawing. Now, this is Horizon Studies. We are going to be creating and using a variety of colors to produce this piece. To produce this piece, we are going to produce it on Saturday, but we are going to gear up and get started with the colors that we need to create this Horizon series. Now, that can be seen down on the left-hand side of the studio. We will also show how we work with color and how color is applied. We've already applied the color down in the center, but down on this left-hand side, I'll walk and I'll talk throughout that process so we can understand how the color is added and how we will create one of these Horizon series. Now, if we have questions at any given time, again, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that we may have about the glass blowing process. But as we see it down in the center, I do just want to take a step back and introduce the furnace where all the glass is being pulled out of, just so we all understand where the process begins. Now here at the museum, we have two 1,000-pound furnaces. They're both holding approximately 1,000 pounds of molten glass. And behind that door lies a crucible. A ceramic pot is what we're heating up here at the museum at that 2,100 degree Fahrenheit. We can see our our illustration on the top screen, which just really simplifies it. When we open that door, I'm sure here we could feel a little bit more of the heat, but we could all see that just red and orange, but there is so much more going on inside. There in that drawing, we can see the crucible or ceramic pot that we are heating up here at the museum. We do run our Kids Design Glass program here at the museum. If you're in the airport, you'll notice that we have a traveling collection there also, where you can view even more of our Kids Design Glass program. But that's just one of many projects that we do here at the museum. We can see that down in the center, we've brought over some clear glass, and we've created a clear lens towards the tip. When we're done creating this clear lens, the next step will be to transfer our piece onto a different rod and begin to work on the opposite end. That way we can go ahead and begin to build the walls and make our shape look like a true cone. You are allowed to take as many pictures and videos as you like. My favorite place to take pictures is always this top balcony. For some reason, it's like the best place to take pictures. Some of the best ones have always been taken from up there. And if you plan on showing around to your friends, your family, all we ask is if you post it on social media, all you do is tag the Museum of Glass. Other than that, please show them around to your friends and family. Show them the cool and unique things you saw here at the museum. Earlier, we were explaining about what this museum is. We're essentially Disneyland for glass artists now, or any artists. This is a place where artists can come explore the medium. Now, for our audience that joined us a little later in today's demonstration, down in the center, we are going to be working on these cone shapes. There's a color on the inside and also a color on the outside. Then down on your left-hand side of the studio, we will be working on a piece very similar to this Horizon series. But one unique thing about this is to create something like this that has multiple colors is time-consuming. We are going to work on this piece on Saturday, but we're going to begin by creating all the pieces necessary to create something like this. Now that's going to be happening on your left side of the studio as we create color cups. Notice that there's two different colors already on this core. We will then bring it over and stuff it with hot molten glass. So we break the cup free, it gets set on the ground, and then we come over with the hot molten glass. That hot layer on the surface will act like glue, so it can, that way both our cup and our core become one. And just like that, we now have several colors on one piece, and we are going to repeat that process to make one of these Horizon series. Now this small torch that we use towards the tip, now that packs a punch. It may be small, but it is the hottest piece of equipment on this studio. That small torch can both boil away the clear glass, or even worse, boil away the color that we may have. So we are careful not to overexpose it at over 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Now we continue to enter what we call a glory hole, which is a reheating chamber. It's approximately 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit. The only difference between the one in the center, the one on the right, and even on the left-hand side is just that that one in the center is larger, so as our piece gets bigger, we can open more doors to accommodate its size. One key difference between the glory hole and the furnace is that the glory hole is turned off at night to save energy. So when we're done with today's demonstration, we'll turn off that chamber, but typically someone will enter the museum about 2 hours before we even open, just to turn them on and ensure they're at an adequate temperature when our visitors and our glass makers arrive. So how do you get into the business? How do you become a glassmaker? There's a variety of different ways. You could go to your local studio and take one class. After a class or two, then you can be asked to assist and slowly get your foot in the door that way. You could also go to college. There's approximately 50 colleges in the United States that teach glassmaking as an art form. That's another way you can get your foot in the door. Now, our visiting artist, D.H. McNabb down here, is actually graduated from Rhode Island School of Design, RISD, in 2012 and has a Master's of Fine Arts. RISD is also known to produce some of the best glassmakers. That's where DH is coming from. Now, he's been working with glass for over 20 years, and he's taught all across the world. And just earlier this summer, he was teaching at the renowned Pilchuck Glass School located in Stanwood, Washington. So earlier, we were talking about a little bit about Dale Chuli. He did found that school. And it also happens to be where our visiting artist just finished teaching a class. Well, down in the center, we bring over a punty. Now, this rod is only temporary, which means it needs to be strong enough to withhold the weight of our cone and also any pulling or tugging that might occur. But it also needs to be weak enough to break when it's time and this piece is complete. Now, this move is very interesting. Now, our visiting artist, D.H. McNabb, goes in and recenters the vessel. This is to ensure that this piece will be turning on the same plane. We're seeing the same process on the left-hand side of the studio, of the constriction and the water and the piece being broken free. But notice the first heat, we spend our time ensuring that this piece is on center. Later on, if we skip this step, we'll notice that our sculpture or our vessel, anything we produce, is lopsided and it's not aesthetically pleasing. It might be off to the center. Now, I do want to go through the hierarchy that we're going through in this studio. We'll first introduce the gaffer. Now, we've met our visiting artist is working in the center of the studio, D.H. McNabb, but he's also considered the gaffer, and the gaffer is just the person in charge. The gaffer will take a seat in the center of the studio. So earlier I had explained that our visiting artist is also an instructor, a teacher. I have some of his students down here at the Museum of Glass. And the way that we operate here in this museum is by having visiting artists. Just this summer, we've had over 10 visiting artists coming from across the world. And nearly every single week this summer, you'll see a different visiting artist coming here at the museum to explore their artwork. We give the opportunities to artists to not worry about the constraints of operating a studio or even hiring people to work with you. We're essentially Disneyland for artists. This is where dreams can come true. And our artists can vary anything from instructors to architects, designers. To us, it's really about the idea that they're going to push forward. And there's a variety of ways an artist can arrive here at the museum. So we're seeing a close-up from the inside, and we'll notice that clear towards the very tip. Before we transferred it, we spent quite some time applying that clear lens on the very tip, but also ensuring it's smooth with the vessel itself. Well, on the left-hand side of the studio, we've been working on one of these cups. We'll notice that even this one, it has a variety of colors already in it. And if you look very closely, we can see some of those colors cooling down. This cup will be used later during this residency to create the Horizon series you're seeing on our ground with our chalk drawing. So we will be using that later on during this residency. However, if we want to prevent that cup from breaking, it will have to slowly cool down back to room temperature. Anything that we produce, anything that is made here will have to slowly cool down in the oven on the right-hand side of the studio, called the annealer. This oven is currently sitting at 920 degrees, and it will be the home of everything we produce. Everything from the cup on the left-hand side to the finished vessel in the center will cool down in this oven for the next 12 and a half hours. Well, down on that left-hand side, to break it free, just a few droplets of water on the end of the punty, the temporary rod. So down on your right-hand side, we're going to be doing the coloring application. So as we see our vessel in the center, if you're wondering how that color is applied, we're seeing it down on this end. The color begins in a bar form. Now we're purchasing our bar, our color, from a manufacturer, and typically color is made outside of the United States in places like Switzerland, New Zealand, Germany, and it comes to us in a bar form. Depending on what we're making, we can use a little bit of this bar. But heck, if we really wanted to, we could even use 2 or 3 of them together. That would just dictate the density of the color, however. For this case, we just use an inch or 2 of solid color. It is then preheated and placed on top of the bubble. Our job now is to push that color layer evenly around the bubble to create a thin layer of color. Even our piece that we see in the center, it's due to the clear glass on the top and the beginning bubble in the center that magnify that color layer and make it look solid, although we now know it is just a thin layer of color. Even when we're spreading the color out, as we see on this right-hand side of the studio, we have Gabe, a professional glass maker, and he's spending his time distributing that color evenly around the bubble to ensure we have an even color layer around our bubble. If we speed or rush through this process and push too much color to one side, we will then notice that there may be a side with a lot more color than another side. Good morning. Welcome to the Museum of Glass. Thank you for joining us. Well, I hope you're enjoying the Museum of Glass. We are going to be working on these cone-shaped pieces that we see here on our chalk drawing with our visiting artist, D.H. McNabb. So our visiting artist is working down in the white in the center of the studio. He's also called our gaffer, and the gaffer is just a person in charge. He'll take a seat at the center and really begin to work with the massive glass himself. Now the artists that we have coming here at the museum, they can vary. Well, notice our artist today is a glass blower with 20 years of professional experience, but some of the artists that we have coming through the museum have never worked with glass. We do provide them with a professional crew. Some of the crew members you see here today are part of this Museum of Glass full-time staff. If you're wondering where this process begins, well, on the left-hand side of the studio, we have a furnace, and we have one of our glass makers gathering glass out of the furnace itself. On our top screen, we're seeing a diagram. We'll notice that it's at 2100 degrees Fahrenheit, and even when we open the furnace door, it looks red and orange inside. So we have our diagram to really simplify the design. We'll notice that the crucible or the ceramic pot is being heated up by natural gas, which is our fuel source. Now, one key thing is that furnace, we have 2 of them, one on the left, one on the right of the studio. They are both on 24/7, 365 days a year. It doesn't take any form of breaks, with if that's a vacation, a weekend off. None of that. They've been on for about 7 years straight, nonstop, and we don't have a plan on shutting them off anytime soon. Our shaping tool this time around is 2 wooden paddles, and they have a charred layer which will ensure it won't catch on fire. There is a variety of things going on in the studio. For my audience on this end, we are seeing the coloring application for the next vessel down on this side. Now that we are nearly complete with our cone, the next step is to bring it back to room temperature. Earlier today, we also made a colored cup with several colors, and now that cup is sitting on your right-hand side of the studio in the oven with the green number 4. Now, it's currently sitting at 920 degrees, and it'll be the home of everything we produce here today. Even our cone, if it's left on the ground, it'll break within a few minutes. Anything from maybe 5 to 10 minutes. However, it will break, crack, or even shatter. To prevent it from breaking, we'll have to slowly cool it down in a controlled environment, hence our annealer. Now we have one of our glass makers down here, Jack Spitzer, who's suited up in a heat protective layer with Kevlar gloves. He's now gonna grab the piece free by adding a few droplets of water on a weak spot. The crevice that we made earlier creates a weak spot in the glass, and then with a slight tap, it's broken free. And just like that, what a success. Can we give a round of applause to our visiting artist down in the center, D.H. McNabb, but also the whole entire Hot Shop crew. Well, we are going to continue today's demonstration, but as our first cone enters the annealer, what will happen, and the reason why we're annealing them, is that the outside of the glass cools down faster than the inside. That temperature difference can stress the glass out, and ultimately that stress causes it to break, crack, or even explode. So if we want to eliminate the stress immediately, we will have to slowly cool it down back to room temperature. Now this cycle is called the annealing cycle, and depending on the thickness of the glass, it can vary inside the annealer. For our pieces, 12.5 hours should be just fine, but if we create something really thick, we might even need to anneal for a few weeks or a few months. Well, on our top screen here, as we continue today's demonstration, I do just want to stop real quickly and show you some of our visiting artist artwork so we can begin to understand a little bit more about him and the artwork that he produces. If you want to see some of his artwork in person, we do have one of his pieces right as you enter the Museum of Glass Hot Shop. Now, as today's demonstration continues, my name is David. If you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand or shout my name. I am more than happy to answer any questions that you may have about today's demonstration and the glass process. As we see down on the left-hand side of the studio, we're using a wet pad and newspaper to shape the molten mass. We could use any form of newspaper. We then drench it in water, fold it, and as long as the top layer stays moist, it shouldn't catch on fire or leave any residue behind. We're also seeing the actual glass blowing process. On our top screen, we're seeing the action on this left-hand side, and one of our students that we have, Jack, is blowing air through the blowpipe. If you wonder how much air do we blow, it's typically about the same air pressure you use to blow out a candle, but it does vary. We're listening for small keywords, something like blow softly or blow hard or even just stop. Today's demonstration will begin with the coloring application and color process. We see that one of our glass makers down on this end, Sarah, has gathered glass, and she begins by rolling back and forth on the steel table. This is to ensure that she has a nice symmetrical surface on which she can continue today's demonstration. We're gonna begin by creating a small air bubble. This is gonna be the beginning of the coloring application. To blow air, Sarah will pressurize the rod, place her finger over the hole. Since we've created a closed atmosphere, the air has no place to go but to pierce an air bubble in the massive glass. And this is how the beginning bubble starts. As we let this cool down by shaping it, we also have the solid color down on this end. The solid color begins in the garage, which is the oven on your left-hand side of the studio. Now that oven is approximately 1,000 degrees. And before we start, we actually pick out our color and then break off a certain amount. Depending on what we're making, we could use a little bit of the bar, or we could use one or two of them. It's just gonna dictate the color density. For today's demonstration, we're only using about 2 inches of the bar. We break it free, set it into the garage, let it preheat, really soak up a lot of that 1,000 degree Fahrenheit. If we try to use the color bar right away, it just breaks and cracks. It ends up on the ground. So we first preheat it. Once it's preheated to a certain temperature, we can then bring it out and apply it to our bubble. So we see Dave Walters down here, another professional glassmaker, helping out our visiting artist, D.H. McNabb. He has heated that color, and although it's gonna look red and orange, it's just the heat distorting its true color. We won't notice that color, the real tint to it, till later on in the process. So we bring in the color, we place it right on top of the bubble, and we will snip it free. It is now Sarah's job to push that color layer nice and evenly around the bubble to create a thin layer of color. We see our visiting artist in the white in the center. He has also picked up some solid color, but this time around it is a white. We're gonna be working on our cones, and we're gonna be adding another detail. There will be a color on the inside and then a color on the outside being white. The larger cones we will use primary colors to create the inside, and then the secondary colors will be slightly smaller cones. Down on this left-hand side of the studio, we're stuffing a cup that has color on the very bottom. We are going to be working towards this horizon project that we see here, replicating sunset and sunrise. To do this with a variety of colors, This piece is going to be made on Saturday, but we're going to begin by already creating the cups necessary to create something very like this. As Sarah continues the coloring application on the right-hand side of the studio, we're going to be casing that bubble with a layer of white. To do so, down in the center, we have the solid white bar. However, it seems that it's a little dirty. It might have picked up some dirt or debris when it was heating inside the garage. So we will spend our time using a diamond tip Dremel to remove any discoloration or chip or anything bad that we might see in the surface of the color. Now, very similar to the color being applied in the center, we're repeating that same process, but this time the white coating the surface. Although it is white glass that's going to be on that surface, you'll notice that it looks red and orange for the majority of today's demonstration, and that is just the heat distorting its true color. Its true color, however, will be coming back once the glass is cooled down properly.